Hello, this is Ratchi from Dork Caracal. Today we're going to talk about adding shadows in CSP using the Forgotten Adventures AutoActions that Strixon has created. To demonstrate this, I'm going to use a simple overlay that I'm making for the Bonehorn Dwarven Fortress that's part of the Cabal Modular Dungeon tile set. If you don't know anything about Cabal Modular Dungeons, I'll include a link in the notes below. So before we begin, let's take a step back and talk about why you might want to do something like this, especially if you're already using a tool like Dungeon Draft. When you're doing shadows in Dungeon Draft, there's quite a different packs that will allow you to make shadows, including Forgotten Adventures and Krager's. These all work great except for a situation where you're trying to export something with transparency. So for the purpose of these overlays is to be able to throw them into any modular dungeon system regardless of the motif that's in play and have them fit in. That means that you need to build these things without floors so that when we drop them in that they're going to fit in that room. And if we put those shadows in Dungeon Draft, um, they're transparent there. And when we export that, it's going to turn into a black blob. So we need to use a tool like CSP or GIMP to do some post-processing on this overlay. So there's a few different types of shadows we can make using the auto actions. So let's go through them. So the first one here is a drop shadow. And I don't actually use this type of shadow very often in making these overlays. Sometimes with smaller or more detailed pieces of decor I might do that, but I'm going to show you how it works. So right now we just have our graphic loaded up and we just run the drop shadow auto action. You see that it's created a nice drop shadow there. It's a really nice shadow, works really well for tokens and decor and stuff like that, but in this case, it really doesn't fit with the way I'm doing my shadows and the rest of my dungeon tiles. So I'm just going to leave that there. The second way we can do these things is with the 5-pixel shadow option. I'm going to scroll in just because it's kind of hard to see at this scale how this works, but we're just going to run this and just select all the defaults, and it's going to add a little bit of a shadow onto there. That works fine, but it doesn't really fit with the style that I'm using, especially in the Bonehorn Dwarven Fortress. So I'm going to undo that, and we're going to show you how to use the same auto action, but we're going to change it so that it produces a much more suitable result. So first we run it, and then instead of using the default, we expand this by 20 pixels. So you can see that it expands out. We're going to change this blur border, and we're going to do it at 100 pixels. This gives us a fairly similar distance to our regular shadows that we're creating in Dungeon Draft. And there you see the shadows there. And in this case, this is a little bit too dark compared to the other shadows, so I'm going to just turn the hue down here a bit. And it will match quite closely with what I have. This is actually a little bit lighter, but because it's possible for us to be putting these into other overlays, I've picked a fairly middle of the road color and darkness for these shadows. And that's it. We just save this and we can continue on with importing it into Foundry and doing the other work that we need to do to create it into a modular dungeon piece. So if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, and I'll see you next time in my how-to series.